Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the winter vegetable planting demonstration. My name is Robin Pollack. I've been a master gardener since 2005. Prior to that, I was an art teacher for 35 years. So as an artist, I like to focus on color, texture, and shape, and as a master gardener, the science of growing plants. When I was a little girl, I lived in England and fell in love with gardening and have been gardening my entire life. Let me show you a little bit of my vegetable garden that I've just recently planted in the fall, about a month ago, and how well it is growing and doing. So today I'd like to talk about the top 10 questions I always get asked. Before we get started, we have to talk about all the planting and information. So here are some of the questions. What is our hardiness zone? What is a hardiness zone? What is our planting zone? What is the first date of the first frost in the fall? How do I prepare my beds for fall planting? What is sustainable gardening? Should I direct seed or use transplants? How do I maintain my garden this fall? How do I control pests and disease? How do I extend the growing season? What are some of the end of the season tasks that need to be done? And finally, what are some specific cool season vegetables and herbs? As far as the planting zone, this class is appropriate for most of the U.S. in zones 3 through 8. However, all of Georgia is within zones 7 and 8. If you're outside this area, please consult with the county extension's office in your area. In Georgia, and especially North Fulton, the official first frost date is November 15th, but that's the average. It could be November 1st, it could be December 1st, earlier or later. You can download the vegetable planting chart from the University of Georgia Extensions, and I will give you those resources at the end of the class. When do we want to plant? In the fall. Well, I like to calculate the planting date. The average first frost date, as we know, is November 15th. I like to count back the number of days to maturity, which you will find on your tag in your plant, plus 18 days for the harvest of the crop. Plus, add your germination time if you're using seeds. What are some of the advantages of planting in the fall? Bolting affects the quality of your harvest. As the vegetables begin to flower, they develop a bitter taste. It's pretty common in broccoli, lettuce, Brussels sprouts, collards, and other greens. So vegetables planted in the spring tend to bolt because the days are getting hotter and longer. But we can avoid bolting by planting in the fall. A quote that says it all: when plants bloom when we want them to, we call it flowering. When plants bloom when we don't want them to, we call that bolting. So now we want to prepare to plant. How do we do that? First, you need to clear your debris from your summer planting. Don't add diseased plant material to your compost. Simply throw it away. You can chop up residual litter and bury it in a furrow to speed decomposition, but be sure and allow several weeks before replanting. For existing beds, I like to add 1/2 to 1 inch of organic matter, whether it's compost, soil conditioner, manures, or things like that. And for new beds, I like to add 2 to 4 inches. Be sure and remove rocks, sticks, and things like that for growing root crops. And most importantly, get a soil test. What is a soil test? Well, soil tests measure the acidity and the alkalinity of the soil. In vegetables, we want the soil to be a pH between 5.5 and 6.5. In order to get it analyzed, you can take a sample to your county extension office for $12 a sample, Or you can obtain a soil testing kit for $15, which includes the container and prepaid postage. The website is listed below, www.soiltest123.com. And in order, once you get your results back, to raise the pH, you might want to spread granular dolomitic lime. But remember, it takes 6 months to have a full effect, so do it early. And also, I wanted to add fertilizer. I like using 10-10-10. Certain vegetables are heavy feeders, some are medium feeders, and some are light feeders. A lot of our summer vegetables are heavy feeders, but also cabbage and lettuce and things like that, broccoli, sweet potatoes. Some are medium feeders, beets, carrots, peas, and radishes, beans, and a lot of other summer vegetables. And finally, the light feeders are southern peas. So what are some frost-tolerant vegetables? Well, tender vegetables are mostly your summer vegetables, and they're damaged by a light frost. So you want to plant those after the last frost in the spring. Some vegetables are semi-hardy. They can tolerate a light frost. Beets, carrots, cauliflower, celery, Swiss chard, Chinese cabbage, and lettuces and parsnips all can tolerate a light frost. So we want to plant those late in the spring or early in the fall. And then we get to the hardy vegetables, which tolerate a hard frost. There are vegetables like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, collards, kale, kohlrabi, onions, parsley, peas, radishes, spinaches, and turnips. We can plant those in the early spring or late fall. So what are cool season crops? Cool season vegetables require cool soil and air temperatures to germinate and grow. They're grown in the spring and fall, and they often tolerate a frost. Generally, they have very shallow roots and are susceptible to drought, so you want to water them more frequently. So let's look at my early fall vegetable garden today. In it, you see that I have lots of lettuces and I have some wonderful fall vegetables. You might notice that lettuces are very tender, hardy plants. And so by the first frost, which is around November 15th, they will either freeze or just die. At that point, I will replace them with some more cold, hardy plants. So let's see what I have in the vegetable garden today. In the front, you might see some arugula, and then I have some Swiss chard and some lacinato kale. Of those three, the arugula will be replaced. The Swiss chard is moderately hardy, and the dinosaur or lacinato kale is cold hardy. In addition, we have other tender hardy vegetables such as buttercrunch lettuce, Mizuni lettuce, another mixed herb lettuce from a blend, as well as bok choy and romaine in the front. All of those are fairly tender, hardy vegetables and will not withstand a freeze. However, we now have medium hardy vegetables such as the Swiss chard and some others that will withstand. At that time, when we have a cold frost, I will simply pull out the dead plants and replace them. And finally, we have some cold hardy. They will stand a hard freeze. Again, I mentioned that kale is very hardy, as well as some of the broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. So in this bed, which has been planted about a month ago, you see that the lettuces are doing extremely well and that the other vegetables are coming along nicely. Now, you may live in an apartment or a condo, and you might not have room for a bed of a garden. Just know that you can grow the same vegetables in pots or containers on your balconies as long as you have about 6 to 8 hours of sun a day. Now let's talk about growing some vegetables in pots. So let's look at a pot that I have planted, and you see it has all of the same elements in it. I have the kale, I have a Swiss chard as the center, I even have these wonderful red bull's blood beets. So what I like to do is I like to take my middle plant, which should be the tallest. I like to have a thriller, which is the center, a filler, and something to spill. So I dig up the center, and I like to plant the center first. I add some fertilizer. I am adding a slow release granular, but you could also use a water soluble pre-fertilizer. And you see that this will supply your vegetables all season long. So let's talk about different types of gardening. We have conventional versus organic gardening. What are your perceptions of conventional gardening? What are your perceptions of organic gardening? And what does sustainable gardening mean to you? To me, sustainable gardening combines the best of organic and conventional. There are no specific rules or required practices. Some of the sustainable gardening principles that I like to follow is choosing plants and varieties with the fewest pest problems. Be sure you choose the right site conditions for the plant. And of course, healthy soil is a basis for healthy plants. I like to use mulch to reduce weeds and conserve water, and use effective means of watering. Use cultural, mechanical, and biological controls to manage pests and disease, and use chemical control as a last resort. These principles of sustainable gardening can be applied to your entire landscape. Do we want to use transplants versus seeds? Well, you can use both. Their tips for sowing seeds there are many kinds. There are standard seeds, pelleted or coated seeds, and seed tapes. Be sure you follow the package directions for spacing and depth. I like to use a spice shaker for seeds that are so small, or mix them with sand so that they can be easily put in the furrow. In the fall, if the soil is dry, soak the bottom of the furrow and plant the seeds slightly deeper. But as they begin to grow, we need to thin them. So begin thinning when the plants have 1 to 2 pairs of true leaves. Refer to the spacing on the seed packet to know how thin to make them. If you decide to plant transplants, be sure you inspect plants for disease, insects, and healthy roots. They should be white in color. Water the soil if you need to prior to planting. And if the roots are root bound, be sure you wiggle them and separate and spread the roots. After planting, I like to apply a water-soluble starting solution or granular, which is high in phosphorus. And now we want to maintain this wonderful garden. How do I maintain it? Well, I like to apply mulch at planting time. It helps conserve moisture, it prevents weeds, and it moderates the soil temperature. 2 to 4 inches of mulch is most effective, but keep the mulch away from the crown of the plant to avoid rot and mildew problems. Fall vegetables have very shallow root systems, so it may need more frequent watering. And of course, there's weeding. I like to hand pull or cultivate lightly to avoid injury to the roots. And now we want to talk about how do I control my pests? We call this integrated pest management, and there are several controls that we can use. The first control is a physical control, where you can use row covers, hand pick the insects off, use traps and lures. Maybe they'll freeze in the winter time, or use fencing around the area. As far as cultural controls, we've talked about the soil fertility and pH, and you want to have adequate water and the correct soil temperature. Be sure you rotate your crops and don't put the same family of vegetables in the same place for 3 to 5 years as they deplete the nutrients of the soil and need time to replenish. Sanitation is also very important, as well as planting resistant varieties. We did talk a little about mulching and watering, and all of these are cultural controls. As far as biological controls, we can attract beneficial insects, minimize pesticide application, especially so we get those beneficial insects. For example, BT, otherwise known as Bacillus thuringiensis, is one of the natural biological controls that we can use. And as a final and last resort, we can use chemical controls, but you have to be very careful. So let's talk about an example. Everybody's heard of aphids, and they are a nuisance, and they feed on the lower and underside of the leaves. They leave a sticky honeydew, which can attract ants. So the first thing I do is use a strong water spray from my hose to remove them. But if I have an infested leaf like the one shown on the side, then I may have to remove the entire leaf, the ones that are heavily infested. I also want to avoid over-fertilizing, and I may use row covers so that they will not lay eggs. I might also encourage lady beetles, and I can use an insecticidal soap such as neem oil. Cabbage loopers are another very popular insect of cold crops. You will know you have them when you see irregular holes in your leaves, small green eggs, or larvae on the backside. Again, they can be hand removed, or you can use the Bacillus thuringiensis as a control. The row covers, again, will prevent them from laying eggs. So we've talked about what we can do, but let's talk about the signal words on the pesticides. If you see the word danger, it means it's highly toxic. Warning, moderately toxic. Caution, fairly low toxicity. But organic chemicals can be dangerous too. Be sure and follow the instructions on the label. More is not better and may be very harmful. Many of us want to extend our growing season, and as we've said, the average first frost is November 15th. But what if you hear there's a freeze coming? What can we do to extend it? I like to use burlap row or covers to protect plants. You can also use non-breathable fabric, but if you do, be sure and remove it in the morning so that the plants can breathe and get sunlight. For individual plants, you can simply use a milk jug with the bottoms cut out. As well as, what are we going to do at the end of the season to get ready for the following spring? Well, you want to be sure you're nice and sanitized and clear the debris that can provide shelter for overwintering pests. You might compost or dig under the soil, except if it's diseased, you want to remove it. You also, at the end of the season, want to add organic matter. And if parts of your garden are not being used for winter vegetables, I recommend planting a cover crop such as crimson clover, winter wheat, alfalfa, which you can simply dig under in the spring. So remember, take your soil tests. The pH affects the absorption of the nutrients in the soil. Other end of season tasks you might want to perform are prepare a raised bed for peas that you can plant in early spring, February, and March when the soil is workable again. I also love to clean and store my garden tools, and the most fun of all is order seed catalogs and start planning for next spring. A lot of people think that the end of the summer is the end of their vegetable gardening for the year, but there are many vegetables that grow best in the fall weather and can be enjoyed all winter long. Try growing a second crop of cool season vegetables and herbs in your garden and your pot.
Winter vegetables such as broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, and an assortment of greens can be grown in the fall and the winter. I personally like fall gardening because the temperatures are usually mild, disease pressure is low, and if it's dry, insects can be less troublesome after the temperature drops. So let's talk about some of the favorite herbs in Georgia. And the first one I'd like to talk about is a bull's blood beet. Beets are a southern favorite. This root vegetable is quick growing and needs to be planted in full sun. The soil is best when the alkalinity is neutral and it needs good root drainage and soil high in potassium for good root growth. It does tolerate cold and some frost. So the first thing I would like to do is take it out of its pot, and it seems to be root bound, so I'm going to wiggle, 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 and take some of the roots and wiggle them out and put it in the ground, adding some granulated fertilizer, but of course you can use the water-soluble type too, and then plant it. So this is the first vegetable we're going to be talking about. The second vegetable is broccoli, and broccoli is a very large vegetable, and it needs plenty of room to grow. Plant them in a sunny area with lots of room. It can be grown as both a spring crop and as a fall crop. Keep it evenly watered, but avoid watering the head and just keep it in the soil around them. These plants are heavy feeders and need adequate regular fertilization. Harvest when the buds of the heads are firm and tight. Cut the stem at an angle and the plant will continue to make side shoots for additional harvesting. Some broccoli varieties for Georgia are Green Comet, Bravo, or Cleopatra. So in order to plant this, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take it out of the pot, and you see that it is not too root bound. So I've already added fertilizer to my soil, and I'm going to simply plant it, and there you have it. So that was the broccoli. Next, we're going to talk about cauliflower. Cauliflower have similar care requirements as broccoli. They can be grown in the spring and the fall, and again, plant them in a sunny space and evenly water them. They also grow well in cool weather, but don't like temperatures below 60 degrees. Use a frost cloth at night to extend their growing season, since cauliflower is a slow grower. To bleach the heads, pull the leaves up and tie them over the curd, which is the head. And when the curd gets about the size of a golf ball. There are new self varieties that are now available, self-blanching varieties. Some harvest them when the heads are 6 to 8 inches and firm. Some varieties for Georgia are Andes, which is a self-blanching type, Snow Crown, Early White, Violet Queen, and other hybrids. They even have purple cabbage, which turns green when cooked. Simply turn them over. Again, give them plenty of room to grow. Pull them out of the pot. Add some fertilizer. And place them in the ground to grow. In this garden that I have tall, medium, and short things. The broccoli I know gets the largest, so I put it either in the center or towards the back. Then in front of the broccoli, the red, are mustard greens, which we will talk about in a few minutes. I also have kale, and I have spinach, which is low growing, as well as the beets. And in the front, I have Brussels sprouts. Now, I did say that the early fall is a good time for planting lettuces. So in this bed, I do have a romaine head, and I'd like to plant it because it is one of our fall vegetables. Again, it's a little root bound, so I'll wiggle them, put some fertilizer, and plant my romaine. This will probably have to be pulled out of the ground around December 1st and replaced with a hardy vegetable. And then now let's take one more look. We have collards in the way back. And these collards are a Georgia staple. Um, and finally, we have leafy greens. The leafy greens are lettuce, which we just talked about, which is one of the most giving veggies you can plant, since you can harvest the leaves many times. But do plant a blend of different types of lettuces for variety. Popular choices are romaine, butterhead, red leaf, and arugula. But because of its shallow root system, lettuce is great to grow in both pots as well as in your garden. To harvest, just snip or pick the outer leaves, leaving the center leaves to continue to grow. And then we come to spinach. Spinach is a very simple plant to grow in Georgia. It prefers sun, but one of the few vegetables that can tolerate partial sun. It's also tough in cold weather, even handling some frost. Like lettuce, it's great for containers planting. Harvest as soon as the leaves are mature in size. The longer you wait to harvest, the more bitter the leaves become. I like to pick the outer leaves first, giving the center leaves more time to grow. And let's go ahead and plant it. Oh, very root bound. So I'm going to open up the roots, put a little fertilizer, and plant my spinach. You notice it's in the front of the bed so that it will not be shaded out by the other taller vegetables. And now let's talk about kale. We have all kinds of kale, and it's a member of the cabbage family. It's not only a superfood, it's a super plant. It tolerates cold and frost. They grow well in the garden beds or pots, and you want to harvest when the leaves are about the size of your hand. Like lettuce and spinach, put the outer leaves first. Choose the smaller, tender leaves for salads and the larger leaves for cooking. As you see, we have red Russian kale in the front, and towards the back here, I'm going to plant a dinosaur kale, otherwise known as lacinato. So let's get the kale. It grows fairly tall, and put it in and plant it. Now, last, we're going to talk about carrots. They are a cool season crop, and a freeze won't even harm them. Most modern varieties came from France in the early 1800s. They need full sun and a well-drained soil. You can sow the seeds, 3 seeds per 1 inch. Cover them with about a 1/4 inch of soil every 1 to 2 weeks from midsummer, and keep moist. Then thin the plants every 2 inches, and potassium is good for root growth. I will show you my carrots when we go down to view the rest of my garden. Cabbage is also a cool season crop that can be grown in both the fall or spring. They need at least 1 square foot per plant, so that we want to plant them 12 inches apart. You can space the larger varieties closer together, such as Rio Verde, if you want a smaller or medium head size. They can be harvested when the cabbage head is nice and firm, and they need a little more care and a little more space. Cabbages are also heavy feeders and will need to be fertilized regularly. Avoid growing them near broccoli or cauliflower because, as you remember, they are all heavy feeders and will deplete the soil's nutrients faster together. Some varieties for Georgia are Rio Verde, Tasty, and Savoy King.
So, what are some cool season herbs that we can plant? Herbs can be grown year-round in the South due to our mild winters. Some hardy options are rosemary, thyme, sage, oregano, parsley, and chives and lavender. Some chives may go dormant in the coldest part of the year, but they will come back. Tender herbs like basil and tarragon can be brought in and placed in a sunny spot.
Growing herbs can be a year-round activity in the South, not just in the spring and summer. Many herbs can tolerate the South's mild winters outside. Hardy options like rosemary, thyme, sage, oregano, parsley, and chives, and even lavender can stand up all the cold winter. Once winter sets in fully, chives will go dormant, and oregano and thyme may lose some of their leaves due to the frost, but they will continue to grow new leaves that you can harvest. Tender herbs like basil and tarragon can be brought inside and placed in a bright, sunny window. Cool season herbs need about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day. Herbs can be grown in raised beds or alongside your flowers or mixed in your ornamental beds to accent your cool weather blooms. Be sure and add a layer of pine straw in the winter to protect them in the landscape. They are also easily grown in containers inside or outside. They can be grown together or individually. So, in case of a freeze, I like to water it outside the herbs well and use a frost cloth to protect them. So today we're going to plant a few herbs in this pot. Again, whether you live in an apartment, a condominium, or have raised beds or in-ground beds, because herbs tend to spread. And if you have a limited space in your garden, you will want to maximize the space and put your herbs in pots. So today we're going to start with an evergreen herb, rosemary. This rosemary is an upright variety, and it can grow to about 4 feet. So you want to give it plenty of room. And what I like to do is plant my center first. I've already put my soil in here and I have amended it. So I know it's nutrient rich and it has everything that I need. But I will simply at this point dig my center, because I always like to start with my center to give it some balance. And if your pot is just a 3-sided pot, meaning there's a wall here, then you could plant it in the way back. I like my pots to be high, medium, and low plants. That way, all the plants get the adequate amount of sun that they need. So because this pot is going to be seen in the round, I am going to take the rosemary, and you notice when I took it out of the pot, the roots had wrapped all the way around. So I want to give it some room to grow and wiggle them and open them up so they can spread their wings. I also like to add a fertilizer to start the process. You can use a granular fertilizer or you can use a water-soluble fertilizer just to get it started and get good root growth. So I put my rosemary in the middle and cover it up, and it should grow beautifully. Next, I would like to add some parsley. Well, parsley grows well in part shade, meaning 6 hours of sun or more, but be sure you water and often the seeds so that they don't dry out. Once the leaf stems have 3 leaflets, you are ready to harvest it. So, it is also a very desirable plant for the swallowtail butterfly. So you will encourage them to come if you plant it. Again, I take the plant out of the pot. This one too is root bound. So I will simply wiggle the roots again, dig a hole, and put the plant in it. Add a little fertilizer and place my plant. Now, I know that the rosemary is going to be much taller than the parsley, so this would be my medium plant. I like balance. I was an art teacher. I like color, texture, and shape. So when I design my pots or my garden, I use the elements and principles of design: color, texture, shape, and so forth. So now I'm going to take my other parsley and add a little fertilizer and plant it on the other side, so I'm beginning to balance my pot. The next herb we're going to plant is cilantro. Cilantro has a very short lifespan, and it is developed seeds in hot weather. So we often think of it as a hot season vegetable, herb, but in reality, it is a cool season herb. You want to pinch it back to about an inch so that it will encourage a fuller flush and a bushier plant. Sniff off the top part of the main stem soon as it appears to avoid developing flower buds. So I know that cilantro will not be around for long, but I do know that it's a wonderful herb and can grow tall. So again, I'm going to put it towards the back because I know it will grow very large. The next plant we're going to talk about, the next herb, is thyme. It's a beautiful creeping ground cover, and all thyme is fragrant, and there's several different varieties to choose from. Water the plant normally and prune it black in the spring and summer to contain its growth. This is one of the herbs that grows very large and spills. So we now have a thriller, we have a filler, and I'd like to plant a spiller. And it will come over the side. It's not very root bound, so I can simply put it in the front, add some fertilizer, and plant it. And as you see, it's already spilling over the front. And finally, we have sage. Sage is a perennial herb. As a young age, it needs a lot of moisture until it starts to grow, and then it grows quickly. You don't want to harvest too much during the first year so that the plant will continue to grow. So growing your own herbs and vegetables is one of the most rewarding things to grow in the garden. They taste better and save you money. So as we plant this sage, you see it's nice and full and very tall. So look at what a nice design we are already starting with. And oh goodness, I forgot to talk about oregano, which is also a wonderful winter herb and also a spiller. So I might put it on the side to give me some balance and let it start spilling out. Not a lot of root bound, so we'll add a little fertilizer. Plant our other spiller, and look how full it's starting to look. And last but not least, I wanted to show you chives. Chives tend to go dormant in the winter, but you can certainly cut and harvest these. And in the early spring or late fall, you will get plenty of chives. They do get tall, so again, I'm going to wiggle the roots, and let's put it on the other side of the cilantro. So here you have a wonderful herb pot that will grow all fall long, and you will be able to snip and enjoy your herbs. Happy gardening.
So let's take a look at my established herb garden that I have planted.
And I wanted you to see the rest of my garden that's already been planted. As I said, I grow herbs in pots because they overgrow my beds. And in this pot, we have sage, we have rosemary, cilantro, lavender, tarragon, which I'm going to be bringing in, basil, which I'll bring in, lots of oregano, some wonderful pineapple sage that was left over from the summer, which is beautiful red blooms, and even some lemongrass that has not come out yet. We have strawberries in a strawberry pot, and here is my planted bed from about a month ago. As you see, I have the dinosaur or lacinato kale in the middle, and then I have some red Russian kale around it. Again, I'm dealing with tall, medium, and low. So in the front, I have spinach and Brussels sprouts. And on the corners, I have my bull's blood beets. Because parsley is a beautiful filler and a different texture, I like to put it as a burst of color. You also will see my mustard greens around it because they get the next taller height, as well as Swiss chard. So this has a mature feel to it. It's starting to produce, and we are excited to be able to eat it. In my last garden over here, in my raised bed, I have a net with a support structure. And on the back side, I have my snow pea pods. And they will grow up the vertically up the net and produce wonderful, wonderful snow peas. I also have seeds of beans on either side. This I call my seed bed because I have my beets growing in this row. I have my watermelon radishes growing in this row, and my carrots coming up in this row. So be sure and label your rows because you might think this is an empty bed. What I like to do is combine my radishes and my carrots in a to put them together in the row. The reason for this is carrots come up very quickly and radishes come up very quickly and carrots take their time. So enjoy the seeds because they are quite rewarding and you will enjoy them all season long. Thank you so much for visiting my garden today. I hope you've enjoyed it and learned something. Happy gardening.
So here are some photos of my mature garden from last year. As you see, they have grown quite nicely. As far as the resources, you can search all of these vegetables by subject, vegetable, or circular number. And we have provided those circulars through the countyextension.uga.edu/publications. We also have books on the subject, Southern Living Garden Book, or the all-new Square Foot Gardening Book by Mel Bartholomew. You might have noticed that some of my beds were quite full, and I use this technique on many of them. Or you can call North Fulton Extension Helpline to get information. We want to thank our promotional partners for helping us spread the word, as well as our media partners for giving us all of the media coverage. And now, are there any questions? Dana?
Thank you, Robin. Yes, one participant asked, are broccoli and cauliflower deer resistant?
They are not, but you can spray your lawn or spray around your vegetable garden with a Deer Be Gone product. Also, you could use some of the controls that we talked about in the presentation, such as fencing or row covers.
Perfect, thank you. Another participant asked, how do you meet the needs or the requirements of each of the herbs in terms of water usage if they're all planted in the same container?
First of all, you want to have a pot with adequate drainage. Most of the herbs that were planted in the pot today have similar water requirements. And again, with adequate drainage, you will be able to control the water.
Perfect. I don't have any other questions at this time.
Well, we want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I hope you will all join us in 2 weeks for the final fall class, Cool Season Flower Vegetables at Flowers Beyond Pansies on Sunday, November 7th at 2 o'clock. To view any of the previous classes, be sure and visit the North Fulton Master Gardener YouTube channel on youtube.com/North Fulton Master Gardeners, where they are all recorded. Please register today to reserve a place for the final fall class of the fall season. Thank you again. I hope you enjoyed the class and happy gardening.